Hello.
Hi, this is Marco.
Hello. So I will tell a few words and then give the virtually give the microphone to you. Hello to everyone. I'm glad to see you all at the Mind the Bird campaign webinar. And today the main theme is Delphi and Firebird by the famous man in the Delphi community, Marco Cantu. Marco, I need to send a great thank you from a lot of Russian developers who read your books, and personally from me for the Delphi 2009 handbook. I was 2 months ago, I was totally dumped in Unicode, and after reading this book, everything became clear. So, before Marco will start, I need to tell some words about nearest Firebird events. 4 days ago, there was a Ukrainian Firebird conference in Dnipropetrovsk. Just a few facts. Dnipropetrovsk is, I can say, it's a huge city, but it has 1 million citizens. The conference was organized by the Firebird Foundation Blessing by company Grosby with support of National Mining University and sponsored by IBC Zone, Fast Reports and DRace. These all companies, of course, are related to the Firebird, providing the tools, components and so on. 97 people registered. There was online translation. And since Firebird Foundation decided to but decided to tell people to make 10 conferences about Firebird, this became the first. And all these conferences will be held this year to celebrate 10 years of Firebird. Conference went fine, nice city, nice weather, nice university, food and speakers. There were 3 of the Firebird developers, Dmitriem, Vlad Horson and Alex Peshkov, and there were very interesting sessions about Firebird, the performance optimizations, security and so on. So I have a picture from this conference. You see lot of people listening to Dmitry Yumanov with a great interest. So I'm finished, and Marco, you can continue.
Okay, thanks. I just switched to my slides. Okay, the topic of this webinar is to use Delphi and Firebird together. And specifically, I'm going to focus on one of the technologies that you can use in Delphi to access to Firebird data, which is the internal DB Express architecture. I'll mention other alternatives and other options, but I'll try to focus on this one. And the specific reason I'm focusing on this technology is that in the past, the only way to use DB Express with Delphi was through either the compatibility layer provided by the Interbase driver, which had problems, or some third-party drivers. Starting with Delphi 2010, Firebird is officially supported by Delphi, and so I thought it's quite relevant to look at this specific technology that comes in the box with the product. Again, not because others are not as nice, but because this is one of the default, one of the most common options to create a Delphi application that talks with any database, including Firebird. Before we get into the session, I just want to spend 2 minutes introducing myself. As Dimitri said, I'm Marco Cantu. I'm author of a number of Delphi books. Recently, I started self-publishing some books, so like the 2 handbooks you see here, the one on Unicode and the one on the new version of Delphi, 2010. These books are available on Amazon.com and also on some international Amazon sites. In the printed version, they can be found both in electronic version through my website. So if you visit www.marcocantu.com, you'll find links to how to get the books. Beside writing and along with writing, I'm also a consultant and trainer. So I do seminars beside webinars, directly at company sites, or at times I do public events. And I wanted to take advantage of this webinar to promote the next event I'm giving the next month. We'll be visiting, I'm giving a seminar along with Kerry Jensen, which is another Delphi guru from the US. And we'll be visiting 3 cities in the US and 2 locations in Europe. So it's possible that there is some place near enough to where you live. It's 2 days in-depth event focusing both on new features but also on core foundations of Delphi. And we are alternating, so there'll be sessions by each of us in 2 different tracks, or at times we do joint presentations. It's quite a unique experience, as it's different from any other training, so it might be worth checking if there is a location and a date near you. Having said this, we can actually start focusing on the specific topic using Firebird from Delphi. And again, I'm going to introduce a few things and then focus mostly on the DB Express technology and the new driver provided in Delphi 2010. The starting point is about Delphi. From the list of attendees, I see that there are many Delphi developers, but maybe not everyone. Delphi is a very widespread client-server development tool. Never made big inroads into the web area, although it can be used in the web area, but it's certainly very widespread in the client-server world. And it is quite agnostic in terms of database, so it supports a number of different database servers. But it used to be tied to interface, which is still shipped in the developer license with the product, and that's quite certainly the reason that there is a large number of users, of Delphi users, that actually rely on and use Firebird. The reason that a lot of Delphi users had exposure to interface made Firebird and makes Firebird a very good choice for Delphi development. Also, there's a lot of experience and a lot of different options and third-party drivers and support in using Firebird from Delphi. So it makes a very good tie-in, a very good combination. One area of Delphi which is still strictly related to database, but that is actually getting more interesting over the last couple of years, is the new version of the data snap architecture that Delphi provides. It's a multi-tier layer, so in practice what you can achieve is to have a thin client that's deployed to the end users over the internet. This thin client will not talk to the database, as in a client-server architecture, but will talk through a specific server sitting on your system, and that specific server will talk to the database. So it lets people spread around the world to talk to a Firebird database over HTTP or over REST calls. And it's actually quite relevant, but I don't have time to focus onto it, so I'll just stay on the foundations. But keep in mind that besides the standard client-server world, where Delphi fits very nicely, there is also this multi-tier world that is spreading rapidly. As I was mentioning, Delphi 2010 officially supports Firebird for the first time, because there was always interbase support, but there was never officially from Moreland Firebird support. Now Delphi is owned by Embarcadero Technologies, which put the entire IDE tools and few database tools that Borland had. And they pushed to have Firebird support not only actually into Delphi, but also some of the database management and database administration tool that Embarcadero technology makes actually are starting to have official support for Firebird, which is certainly quite good. So once you have Delphi, how can you actually talk to Firebird? Consider that the very old original database engine that Delphi offered, which was the Borland database engine, is now officially gone. You can still access Firebird through ADO using an ODBC driver, which works. I mean, it's certainly a solution. You can use DB Express with the new specific driver written by Embarcadero, or using third-party drivers, or you can use other solutions, other T dataset classes that lets you customize the data access and at times optimize the data access for the specific database, while at the same time you keep the data aware, the visual experience of Delphi in place. You don't have to give up that. Speaking of native and direct data access, there are a bunch of different solutions, some of which are being actively developed and some of which are in a kind of sleep mode. And at times I kind of lose track on some of those. I've used UIB, I've used and seen people using their sleep, and I know they had issues moving to Unicode. There are also other solutions that are only partially open or fully commercial. Fib+ is certainly the tool used by many people I know and trust. And same can be said of the DevArt, formerly Corelab Solutions. Interbase Object is another classic tool that's being used by a lot of developers to access Firebird from Delphi. But again, the idea of this though, that means touching on all of these options will take kind of hours and hours, and need a specific knowledge of each of them that I don't have. So the idea is to mainly focus on DB Express. As I was mentioning, there is a specific driver in Delphi 2010. In the past, you could use either the there's actually an error here. The native interbase driver, which with issues. There are still alternative options. The InterExpress driver for DB Express, because DB Express uses DLLs to actually hook to the DB. So you can actually plug in these third-party tools like the DevArt and the Obscene production drivers. What is DB Express? DB Express is a very lightweight and almost zero installation architecture. It is lightweight because it doesn't require any specific feature on the DB, and it doesn't offer analysis, knowledge, support in terms of SQL processing. What it basically does is lets you access a unidirectional cursor and read the data. It does not provide caching per se. It does not provide the ability to update data or modify the data it retrieved. But it can use other components that are part of the Delphi architecture, like the client dataset and the provider component, to actually perform these specific tasks. So client dataset can be used as a cache, and the provider can be used both for fetching the data and for providing, at least in the most simple situations, the update code. So the idea is have a very simple, lightweight library. All you have to do is basically deploy the DLL drivers for the specific technologies you are using. So in this case, you'll deploy the single Firebird DLL. plus the client library, and that's it. So there's just one DLL on top of the database client library. The DB Express architecture started on Windows, but actually started at the time Delphi went cross-platform with the Kylix project. It was later ported to .NET as well. Now there is kind of a return to the cross-platform story. I just mentioned at the end of this talk. So in the future, we might again have a DB Express architecture for Linux and for the Mac OS. In terms of database supported, there's a very long list. It's not everyone. There's a couple that are notable missing, but there are certainly all of the most commonly used database servers, and most of them are at the last version level. DB Express, the DB Express version I'm presenting here is what was called DB Express 4 that was introduced in Delphi 2007. It's significantly different from the previous version of the DB Express library. The internal code is actually, in theory, 100% source code. Also, although it can still access existing drivers written in C, C++, which are a good number, actually. Partial source code is included, and the internals of this library, as I was mentioning, are completely different from the past, while the company has preserved the high-end component, the SQL connection, SQL dataset component, compatible with the past, but behind the scenes, the actual code they execute is completely different. And we'll see, we can actually take advantage of the low level because it's not compulsory to use the T dataset, the standard component, to use DB Express. We can actually plug into the lower level of the architecture. There's another feature that's tied to DB Express driver, which is an IDE, a Windows of the Delphi IDE called Data Explorer. This lets you check and view the metadata of a database that's supported, and lets you create, manage connections, drag connections, create tables, change tables, and do a bunch of manipulations based on the database structure. So you can actually view and edit the database structure. And I think that this will also be the starting point of the demo that I'll start giving in a second. As I was mentioning, we have this higher level of components, often called an SQL component from the beginning of the name. There's an SQL connection that supports a number of different features, including tracing and pooling. There is an SQL dataset, which is kind of the all-purpose dataset component. Lets you hook to a query, directly access a table if the database supports that, or open a store procedure that returns a dataset. There's also a monitoring component that I'll show in the demo that lets you see what is going back and forth between the database and the application. So which exact command the application is actually sending to the DB. So it's a very good monitoring and debugging tool for your application. So let's start showing the Data Explorer and this higher level layer of components. I'll share my desktop. Okay, and this is Delphi 2010. Now I have inside this Data Explorer window on the side, I have a Firebird configured with the DB. It's simply a local database. Now, what I can do is to check the status of this database, which is just the default DB. I can check for store procedures, functions, and the various metadata. If I look at a table, I can actually see the fields, see the available indexes, and also do an alter table, so actually check the table definition and change the table definition, like adding data structure or anything like that. Of course, this is not as nice as some of the specific database management tools that you probably use. It's just useful for fast, rapid operations while you are into the development environment. It doesn't replace a full-blown tool. The other thing you can do is actually retrieve the data, or even more at the connection level, you can open an SQL window, and inside the SQL window, you can, for example, create a join on two tables and pick a few fields and run and see the result. This is an external third-party component that's bound into the Data Explorer architecture. That, again, we can use through the DB Express driver only. Another feature you can use is basically to grab one of these tables, and what the system will do is drop in a connection component properly configured, an SQL connection component configured to the database. We can check that the connection works. And okay, and also a table component. Now this is defined as a full table. I don't terribly like this, so I'll rather go for a query and type select from employee, even for a simple structure, but of course what I'm obtaining is the same effect. Now I can actually open this and activate this table. Now, since this is a unidirectional database, what you cannot do is to hook a visual component to it. So if we take a DB grid and hook it to the data source and hook the data source to the employee data set, we will get an error that we cannot browse the data set with a unidirectional cursor. So what we have to do, and you generally have to do when you want to create a full-blown user interface for the DB Express, is to create a cache in terms of using a client dataset component, make the data source refer to this cache, and then use a provider component that will move the data from the data reader, data access component to the in-memory cache. So here we refer to employee, and the data set will refer to the local provider. And at this point, if we open it, we get our data even at design time. So simply by dragging those components and creating this infrastructure, we can have a very simple application up and running. Okay, now we don't really want to delve any further in this application. What I want to do is to open some existing demos. And the first of them uses the same approach with slightly more complex architecture. It has a monitoring component, so we'll actually see what happens behind the scenes. And also, it is configured so that we can update the data, because having an in-memory cache means that every change you do in the grid will actually remain in memory and never be sent to the DB, while this application handles any change to the data, delete, post, or delete or post, that is after an insert or after an edit operation, and basically applies the change from the client data set to the original source. This sends the data back to the database server. How the update query is going to be generated depends on dataset properties. The default setting is to use update where key only, so these are very optimistic locking style, but you can actually modify to where change, where all, or manually pick fields that want to be part of the update statement. So with this code, if we run the program, not only we have a working application, but we can actually change some of the data, and this data will be persisted to the database. So if I stop and run the program again, I've actually done this change. Now, if we look at the log, we can actually see which statements are sent to the server, which is actually not interface, but it uses the same notation. So these are all metadata requests. This is the update statement that we are generating. And the actual execution is should be at the beginning. So to perform this operation, you actually start a transaction, selects, checks for indexes and other metadata, and so on. You can disable metadata access. You can fine-tune DB Express a lot, although it's not very well documented. It has a lot of internal power. Okay, so that's the starting point and the monitoring code. Another example is pooling. What you can do simply by changing the configuration of your SQL connection component in the driver, you can actually plug in delegate drivers. One is a tracing and delegate, and the other is a pooling delegate that you can use. If we plug in a pool, you can customize the pool, max 20 connections, and always keep one enabled. This application has a very simple request that is done inside a thread. So what the thread does is create a connection, connect, open the data set, go through it up to the end, and close the data set. This operation is repeated several times. Now, if we keep, by using connection pooling, the threads will actually use the same connection over and over, so don't have to reconnect every time. Although the code is identical, the code is still says SQL connected true and connected false, but again, it will keep the connection in the pool behind the scenes and will make the code significantly faster. In this scenario, where we need to connect and disconnect individual threads very often. So if we execute the plain code and check the time, it executed in 1.5 seconds, and 1.1 was for the connection, for the repeated connections. If we go for connection pooling, the time is much shorter, and specifically the connection time is much shorter because the connection is kept in memory. So the speed difference is significant. It's not huge, but it is significant. Again, what we are timing here is only the connection is only the connection time, the time for this operation. Okay, while the total time is the time for a complete execution. Okay, next example is we don't really need to have the client data set and this kind of components all over the time, because that's needed only if you need a cache and have a user interface control tied to movement from records to records. If, for example, all you want to do is to populate a list view with database data, then you can simply open a cursor, read through it, and close it. So we don't need to keep the use the client data set and use the cache. The same is true when you want to produce XML, HTML, or any other reporting style of code out of the application. You don't need to keep the data in memory in a cache. That's relevant because at times you might think this is actually required. The next example is different because it will, as you can see, it uses only the connection component because it's the easiest way to set up a connection, but it uses low-level code. So let me get back to the slides for a second. Okay, and move to the next slide, DBX objects. What happens is there is a layer of internal objects, a framework of objects, DBX objects, that sits underneath the SQL component, again, since Delphi 2007. It's a set of abstract classes that, in part, have a concrete class, a generic concrete class implemented by the framework, and some of these abstract classes are actually implemented at the driver level. So the driver provides this specific implementation for the class that might depend on the database. So the idea is actually quite an interesting abstraction layer on top of data access. You can use directly these low-level classes, bypassing the higher layer. You can gain speed by doing so. Not a lot of speed, but you can gain some speed on doing so. You certainly gain more control in terms of what is sent back and forth the database and the application. And again, you can extend these classes to build or customize a driver. In practice, under the TSQL connection, there's a TDBX connection component. The connection component has the ability to create commands, and the commands, when executed, might just do something or return a reader, which is a unidirectional data reader. This architecture is extremely similar to what happens in the .NET framework, in the ADO.NET layer, in terms of data access layer. So the ADO.NET data access layer, not the data caching layer, the dataset component, but the readers and commands are similar, or very similar to what happens inside DB Express. Internally, we have these low-level classes. We have connection, commands, readers. We have value objects, and we have type objects, which are shared among different databases. Okay, so we can actually get back to my desktop and have a look at this code. This is how you get a DBX connection out of an SQL connection. It's simply a property. Notice that a connection has its own class name, so you'll never get the abstract TDBX connection object. You'll get a specific object implemented by the driver. In case of Firebird, Firebird uses the compatibility driver, so it uses a generic driver, a generic class that is shared by all DB Express 3 compatibility drivers. And you can also check other features like the quoted character or other specific database setting, specific setting of the database metadata. If we run this, it's not particularly nice, but we get this information that we're actually using a TDBX Dynalink connection element. Now we can do something more, which is actually execute a command. So this is a direct command. We simply create, again, the connection, do a create command. The command has a text, and then we can execute the query and see which rows have been affected by the command. So how many rows had an employee number below 5 in this specific case. So we just execute SQL statement, a data update statement, and this takes place using this DBX morphic command. Now, even nice, we can actually read the data. So if the command is, for example, a query, when we execute the query, we get back a reader. A reader can be used to read values of the current record, or the various columns, the value of the various columns, or it can be used just to go through the record set, like I do here with the while loop, while reader next reads in this case, the last name. So if we run the application, what we get first is the list of the field types, the internal DBX level field types and their value, an int 16, a string builder, ANSI string builder, a timestamp, and so on. And then we get all of the records in the table, in the result table. So again, rather than using the high-level C dataset compatible SQL component, you can use this low-level DBX object directly and gaining speed and control, although you lose the data-aware compatibility, Delphi data-aware compatibility. So at times they might be nice to use, but at times it will not be a very good idea. Okay, sorry. The last two examples I have ready, and we can get back to the slides later, relate to metadata manipulation. So not only you can access Firebird data at the SQL components level, at the easy-to-use components level, you can also access it at the low level, but you can also access metadata, again, either at a high level or at a low level. At the high level, you set up a connection, as usual. You get an SQL dataset, and what you can do, rather than opening a query, you can use the setSchemaInfo method to load all of the tables, the table names, and you can apply filters, the list of the tables from the database. Or setSchemaInfo, you can actually provide the name of one of the tables and ask for the columns of this table. So shortly, we can get the list of the tables from this database, and we have specifically avoided to pick the system tables. Actually, but I've kept also views. And then we can click on one of them and grab the various fields of the table. This is the table name. This is the column name, type, precision, scale, default value, and other settings. Okay, rather than working at this kind of high-level metadata that was available since the early days of DB Express, since Delphi 2007, actually one of the updates, you can work directly at the metadata level. So for example, you can do things like creating the metadata for a new table object, edit it, like changing a name or adding columns, and ask the database to create the table for you. This means that the driver will be able to generate the proper database manipulation language statement for the specific database, Firebird, but the same could be applied to Oracle or to a different database, and the driver will be able to create the proper statement for creating new objects in the system, creating or dropping tables or doing any other operation. So this 5 lines abstract compared to using directly the DDL, the SQL manipulation statement for the given database server. You can use the same low-level layer, the same metadata, the same provider. The metadata provider is an internal object you can create, and depending on the connection, and you have to include specific information about units for the specific driver, like the DBX Firebird, which in turn includes specific read-only and manipulation metadata classes that are specific to Firebird, like this writer factory, or the read-only metadata that has standard configuration in this case. And here are specific Firebird settings. This is the specific code that makes the driver and the metadata part work with the database. Again, have the source code. You can change things. Would anything be wrong, and customize it. Okay, let me get back to the actual code here. So what I mentioned is we can get, for example, using this meta provider, we can get a collection, which is the list of tables, and then scan through this collection of tables. The result value is a table storage, list of table storages, list of tables. And or you can also create the columns, get columns of the given table name. So again, you can get the list of the table columns. And if we run this, oops, sorry, wrong example. If we run this, we can get the list of tables. We can get the list of columns for one given table. We can create a new table. And then we get the list, we get the new table here. But again, also if we go back to the IDE and to the Data Explorer, we refresh the connection. Sorry, actually refresh the table list. We get the new table. Okay, so we have the ability of manipulating metadata in a very specific ways, with a still generic compared to the DB, but very specifically tied to the given database. So let me get back to the slides. We have actually seen metadata access with the traditional set schema info, and also with the new DBX metadata table structures. Couple of words about Delphi that do not relate specifically with Firebird. My impression, Delphi is getting back in shape. There's a renewed interest and kind of passion for Delphi in the community. Embarcadero Technologies is investing a lot on the compiler, on the IDE, on making Delphi a native cross-platform solution. The idea is to port the IDE, not the IDE itself, not the development environment, but the target to Linux and Windows. Delphi itself has been extended significantly in terms of language. The language has been extended over the last couple of versions with generics, anonymous methods, enhanced RTTI and attributes. So the language is getting on par with other object-oriented programming languages that are quite popular, like Java or C#, but still is native and specific and extremely optimized for the Windows environment, and has seen extensive support originally for Windows 7 and now for Windows Vista and now for Windows 7. So there's a lot of specific native new component. So Delphi is getting, again, back in shape and even aiming at this platform is becoming a cross-platform solution while remaining a native solution. So it makes an interesting development environment to keep in mind. On the other hand, if Delphi is alive and kicking, Firebird has lots of followers in the Delphi camp. So I was certainly one of the many to be very pleased about this improving relationship between the Firebird community and the Firebird Foundation and the company that now owns the products. So having seen support in Delphi for Firebird and support from in other Embarcadero tools for Firebird is certainly a very good, very positive spin compared to the negative and limited relationship that were happening over the past years. Having said this, I'm open to any question, either now or later on by email and my address. And again, you can keep up with what I'm doing, new books and new seminars and new events and what's up in the Delphi community by following either my blog or my Twitter account.
Great.
So if you have questions, it's
yes,
a good
I
time.
have some questions.
Sure.
So people can ask questions in the Q&A menu of the Live Meeting client. And since I can use a microphone, I wish to ask you some questions. The first question, by the way, I need to note that these Firebird DB Express drivers support Firebird 1.5, Firebird 2.1, and I hope it will work with the Firebird 2.5 that release is coming soon. We will check how this driver works, but I think there will be no any problems with it. And the first question, can we get these examples somehow?
Yes, I'll make them available, possibly by blog, but I'll send you an email so you can have a link and download the source code. It's absolutely, they are already available somehow because some of them were in my books, but it's nice to have them at once with a single zip file. So yes, I'll make the examples available.
Okay. The second two questions a bit hard. Maybe so I need to make some explanation. The question about transaction control. In Trace and Firebird are the servers that use a specific transaction control model when transactions can be operated only at the client side. And there can be many simultaneous transactions inside one connection also. Not other servers doesn't support this functionality. So people who are used to use IBX or FIB Plus can be a bit confused how to operate transactions in DB Express. Do you know any articles about this?
No, I haven't seen any specific to that. The default approach in DB Express is support for nested transactions, but not separate concurrent transactions. So at times it's not easy to make it work properly with Firebird and Intertrace that have a specific model. I know that people have kind of customized it because the basic idea is either you go with a default transaction mechanism, which is very naive and very simple, or you can get control of transactions. But again, yes, it supports nested transactions, but not parallel transactions, not out of the box. You might want to have multiple connections. There are other tricks to go around it, but I haven't never seen a clear description of a document explaining exactly how to manage those. It's actually a good idea, but I don't know that much in detail.
So, okay, I will check this and send you what I've investigated.
Okay.
Okay, then the third question. Can DBX be extended in supporting specific client API calls like Firebird events or something like this?
At the foundation, you can fine-tune the metadata and those features. So yes, it can be extended both at the driver level, at the metadata level, at the low level access components. And then you can add features at the components level while customizing the components. It's not that there is. I mean, the drivers architecture, the DBX architecture at the low level is very open. Every class is an abstract class, so you can and every class is created through class factory. So you can customize the class factory, customize the actual class being created. I want to use a subclass, and then you change the way your components interact with the server. So it's very open. The problem is that there's almost no documentation on how to use the DBX classes at the low level. But it's extremely open, up to the point that you can create your custom driver by deriving from some of those classes.
Okay, I think this webinar will force people to check these things, and maybe we will know something interesting, how people digging into the code, making some additions and so on. So, I see the question.
Yeah, there is a question by Doru. I haven't seen any plan for the future, and if I haven't seen, I couldn't say one of these things. But no, I haven't seen any plan for future in terms of using and expanding the use of the low-level classes. I think it can be done. I mean, you can start from those DBX reader and DBX command components and create a framework that's separate from the T dataset VCL components framework. I haven't seen anyone doing that, but it is certainly possible. But I don't see a specific interest from Embarcadero from the Delphi team to push in that direction. In terms of creating custom insert update delete statements, yes, it is certainly possible. What the client dataset component does when you do an update, it will call an update record for each record in that it caches updates in a delta, so it has a list of updates. Then what it does, it sends each line of this delta, which is a dataset in itself, to the provider, and the provider receives an on before update record request. You can just filter this request and say, yes, go ahead, or you can take care of it and manage, so execute your own custom insert delete update statements and say handled true, so you don't have to do anything, I've done it. It's not, there is no visual operation. There is a single component that has the insert delete update statement, and that's a little bit of a pity, requires some extra code, but it's not very complex code. You have to just manage the SQL statements for the updates directly, and you have a lot of information, like in case of an update, you have the original set of fields, so all of the fields of the original record that was read, and the specific fields that you need to update. So you can use those information to determine your update strategy or update multiple tables if there is a relationship, a joint relationship, a complex joint relationship. You might want to update multiple tables, and you can freely do that by inspecting the change. Okay,
Since there are no any questions, thank you again for the presentation. We will place the recording at the mindthebird.com website, and I will look at it the second time. So we need to learn the DB Express finally.
Okay. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm always very happy to do things for the Firebird community, which, well, I actually use Firebird a lot. I have news groups and websites that run on Firebird, so I'm a very happy user. I'm a very simple user, but a very happy user of the technology. So I'm more than happy to get involved.
Thank you, and thank you all for
Bye-bye.
coming. We'll see you at the next Mind the Bird webinars. So goodbye.
Bye-bye.